Hey guys, I just wanted to do a review with you before you take your quiz. What I decided was I would just pick some random questions off your quiz and we would review those so you are prepared when you take the quiz. All right, so let's start with this problem number 1. What is the value of the greatest integer of 3.6? If I look at this, I know this is the greatest integer function because the parentheses are going down. Remember, the least integer one, the parentheses will be at the top. Okay, so when I see the parentheses or the brackets at the bottom, I know this is the round down function. So I know that I'm going to take 3.6 and I'm going to round down to a integer that's no greater than 3.6. So that would be 3. Okay. So I know the answer of this is going to be A, 3. All right, let's look at the second one. And it says, what is the value of, again, I know this is the greatest integer because brackets are going down, right? This says negative 1.1. Now, negative values, we got to be careful. Remember I said just draw a quick number line or just remember the number line. If I'm talking about negative 1, and I got negative 2, and then I got 0, greatest integer function is saying round down to an integer that's no greater than what's in the bracket. Well, if I talk about negative 1.1, it's down, it's like somewhere right here, okay? So this is negative 1.1. So that means if I'm talking about an integer, the next whole integer that's no greater, I would be going this way on the number line. So my answer is actually negative 2, not negative 1. So just be careful with your negative values because you're going down. All right, our next question number 3, says in the function, the greatest integer of x minus 1, which values of the function are equivalent? All I can do is do a plug and check. Okay, all I can do is plug and check. F of negative 1 and f of negative 2. Well, if I think about this, when I plug in a negative 1, that's going to be a negative 1 minus 1. If I plug in a negative 2 into this function, that's going to be still a negative 2 minus 1. If we look at that, we know that's not equal, so A is out. And I need to change my pen color. Let's do blue. All right, number 2, f of 1. Well, if I plug in a 1, that's going to be a 1 minus 1. F of 0, if I plug in a 1, that's still going to be a 0 minus 1. All right, so we know that's out. Let's go to C. C, I plug in a negative 3. Well, we know that's going to be negative 3 minus 1. I plug in a negative 2.1. Well, what does the greatest integer function do? Well, it says you round down to an integer no greater than what's in the bracket. So negative 2.1, again on that number line, if I think about it, negative 2.1 would be somewhere between negative 2 and negative 3. So let's say it's just here, right? And if I have to round down to an integer that's no greater than negative 2.1, I gotta go this way. So that means that the greatest integer of negative 2.1 is negative 3. So that would then be a negative 3 minus 1. And if I look at that, those are equal. So I know my answer choice has to be C. All right, guys. One of the things you'll also have to do is recognize the graphs of piecewise functions and also recognize the graphs of step functions and be able to say which equation matches the graph. So it says consider the following piecewise function. How would the portion of the graph labeled A be defined? So I see this piece right here labeled A. Let me change my color. So this piece is the part that's labeled A. And I want to think about how is that defined. I immediately am going to check my interval. And the interval I can tell on this piecewise function has this break right here at 2. Look at it. Okay, it's very clear that that break is here at -2. I'm sorry, not 2. And then we have another interval break at 2. So you guys can tell kind of when the line breaks off and goes a different way. Those are our interval breaks. So let's go back to the part marked A. I know -2 is where that interval break happens. And then I want to just look at what is the equation here for this part of the line so I can figure out which one of these is the answer. And the best thing to do is just let me look at my 2 points. Okay. And let me determine what the slope is of my 2 points. Well, if I look at it right now off the bat, I know this line is going down. So I know that this line is definitely a negative line, right? Remember I said negative lines go down or they slant back towards the negative x-axis. So I already know that C is not my answer and D is not my answer because those both have positive slopes. I also can take another gander at this, and if I look at this, I know that this line includes all values that are less than -2 because it's on the left side of -2. So if I look at my interval, I'm going to eliminate the interval that says greater than. Because if this was the values that were, if these were the values that were greater than -2, that means that I would be shading the right side of -2. So I know B is out. My answer choice definitely has to be A. And I can just do a quick verification of that. If between the 2 points, what is my slope? Well, my slope is a -1/2. That means I would go down 1, go over 2, and that's exactly what happens. And look, if I went down 1 and over 2 again, that would be my intercept, which is -3. So the line fits. This is perfect. Okay, the last thing you should be able to do is model real scenarios of step functions, which should be pretty simplistic. I went over a lot of examples with the parking and the package and the McDoubles. So expect to look at these examples. Expect to look at these examples and model real world situations. Okay, so Jeremiah lives in New York City and he takes a taxi almost everywhere he goes. In order to calculate the price of his taxi ride, Jeremiah came up with the equation. Look at Jeremiah. Look at Jeremiah being great using his math teacher's suggested practice of using the greatest integer function or the ceiling function. Look at Jeremiah. Go Jeremiah. Okay, P equals 1.80. And I know this is the least integer function. Why? Because the brackets are going to the ceiling. So the least integer of x plus 2.5, where x is the number of miles or partial miles traveled in the taxi. Okay, so now we need to explain the meaning of the constant 2.5 as it relates to the situation. Let's look at this. 2.5 is the base amount that Jeremiah must pay in order for the taxi to pick him up before he has been driven anywhere. 2.5 is the amount Jeremiah must pay as long as the taxi has not driven a complete mile. And then for every mile or partial mile the taxi drives, Jeremiah has to pay 2.50, or Jeremiah must pay 2.50 plus $1.80 or $4.30 per mile in each taxi ride. Okay, let's make sense of this. So X is the number of miles. Okay, so X is miles. P is the price. Okay, so let's look at this and make sense of this. If Jeremiah gets in the taxi and he goes, say, 0.5 of a mile, well, we got to take that 0.5 of a mile and we're going to take it to the ceiling. Okay, so that means that we're going to go to the integer that is the next whole integer greater than what's in the parentheses, right? So that means that I'm going to round it up to 1 mile. Okay, same. If it's 2.5 miles, we're going to round it up to 3. But we're multiplying each mile by $1.80. If I'm multiplying each mile that I round up by $1.80, I know that has to be the taxi's rate. Okay, that's the rate per mile. That's the rate per mile. And I'm going to just say RPM. Okay, with that being said, what is this 250? Well, let's think about if we plugged 0 into this equation. If I plug 0 in here, all of this part would just go away. Okay, it would cease to exist and I would have 250 left, which means that if Jeremiah doesn't pay he doesn't get in the taxi at all, he doesn't ride anywhere, he just sits there inside of the taxi doesn't go anywhere, he has to pay $2.50 just for sitting in the taxi. Okay, that tells me that this has to be the base price of the taxi. Just for me to catch a taxi and sit in there, I have to pay $2.50. Then as the taxi goes, I got to pay $1.80 per mile. So let's look at that and see again which choices match up with that amount. Well, if I look at the choices, the only one that makes the most sense is choice letter A.